When light starts out from a source in an isotropic medium, it spreads uniformly out at the same speed in all directions. What moves is a capable judge of direction, the direction being always away from the point of origin. Origin might be understood by the interval of distance from a source, as in once moved from the point of departure, one might identify the source by the trajectory of movement. To take into consideration the shape of distance might be to recognize an origin, since light at any given moment has a source at its center. Light and the light-sensitive body are constitutive of the conditions of sight. Light enters the eye through the lens, and the light-sensitive retina takes the wave into tissue, converts stimulus into the body's endemic languages. This process is a bodily fact many people take for granted. When a black spot grows in his eye, voiding a part of his visual field, I realize sightedness is not an ability underwritten by natural law, but a process vulnerable to revision and attrition. The loss of sight forces one to scrutinize what makes sight possible. To see is to receive light, to be an energy transfer that itself toggles between the wave and the cell. When the retina detaches from its usual position, the body is unable to receive or process light. That is, light is no longer correspondent with the eye's tissues. In the progression of his partial blindness, there's me perceiving the progression of his partial blindness. Is it important that I'm wearing a white t-shirt and a jacket that frays at the wrist, or that he's wearing sunglasses that hide his eyes? There's a desired part of the scene, the one in focus. The conditions of intelligibility, if otherwise irrecuperable, must be provisioned from what's identified. The iris controls exposure so that the image is not too bright or too dim. In other words, the problem of control is a given in perception. To be seen is to be scopically reciprocated by another. When I look at him, I look at his right eye, because he's only sighted in this eye. I imagine that if I were to look into both his eyes like I did in the past, it might seem to him that I'm looking not at him, but at his face, a little to his left. When we walk together and I'm standing on his left side, he's unable to see me, so I preempt my actions with words, give verbal cues to advise him of the choices I make to stop or change direction or speed. I will often now walk on his left so that I can use my eyes as proxy for his missing field of vision. I make sure that there aren't cars, people, fire hydrants, flower beds, poles, rocks, feathers, leaves, or any other accidental debris that might catch him unawares from the left. I can't and don't catch the things smaller than what I myself am able to see. I can only help in the big dangers large enough to be seen with my own eyes. In the waiting room of the oncology office, on a table near me, there's a book, a manual of sorts intended for the newly uniocular. I look through it with a detached curiosity, not yet knowing the dark bulge in his eye is a tumor. The book instructs the reader on how to perform a mundane task made troublesome by the loss of stereoscopic vision, tasks which likely did not require much effort when having the benefit of sight in both eyes, which now would require concentration and deliberation. Driving, a skill entirely dependent on accurately judging distances between the car and other objects, might not be foreign and demanding, as might pouring oneself a glass of water. While the book has much to advise for the problems of pouring liquids into cups, operating cars, walking, gauging movement in space, going up or down flights of stairs, it has none to give for the problem of rage, anguish, disbelief, anxiety and depression that most people feel in response to losing part or all of their vision. In the waiting room, I also find a framed newspaper cutout hanging on the wall. It's an article detailing the many achievements of Carol Shields, the doctor whose name titles our entry into oncology and appears in many of the ocular melanoma medical papers I'll read. The article is admiring of her take no prisoners attitude as a researcher and clinician. I read that she pioneered the clinical practice of treating ocular tumors with plaque radiotherapy, a medical discovery that made it possible for people to keep their eyes even after tumors had started to grow in them. Other similar articles hailing her contributions to ophthalmology and ocular oncology cover the walls, and all this literature and the literature of the waiting room fills the purgatory of betweenness with reassurance and absentia. The people of the waiting room are silent, but the notice of the doctor's accomplishments is there, cocooning the bored and anxious quiet with its rhapsodic pages. This kind of literature gives us something to do while we wait, gives us, if we are willing, the opportunity to accredit our doctor with the power to preempt suffering. When we're finally called in, we meet her in the flesh. She enters the room with 8 interns trailing in behind her. She turns to G briefly to introduce herself and to shake his hand, and then moves to a small table where 3 touchpads are arranged. She pulls up on the touchpads the many images taken by the many machines at the hospital of the inside of his eye. She starts to dictate loudly in speech neither G or I understand. The tablets take down everything she says. For inexplicable reasons, she becomes short-tempered and angry at her interns and then goes back to dictating. The interns sometimes hand things to her, say yes or no, and repeat things she says. Just as I start to think she won't say anything more to either of us, she turns to G and tells him there's a malignant tumor in his eye. She says the tumor is large and that he has 2 life-saving options. One is to remove his eye, and the other is to undergo plaque radiotherapy. She says she recommends plaque radiotherapy because she wants to preserve his eye, and he says, okay, barely having begun to process. Then she's gone, and we're redirected to another room where a woman tells us surgery is in 2 days. She hands us many pages of forms that must be filled out. I tell her I want to ask some questions, so can I speak to a doctor? And she says she'll ask. She leaves to find someone but returns alone. The doctors are all busy. So we fill out paperwork in the room with the person who handles the paperwork, and when we're done with the paperwork, there's nothing to do but leave. Dr. Shields is not like the woman who helps us with the paperwork. The woman who helps us with our paperwork speaks slowly and answers all of our questions, whereas Dr. Shields is the kind of person who never thinks to solicit for kindness or care. Dr. Shields is quick, scathing almost in her quickness, and her speech is made of the hardened codices of science. Later, I find a video on YouTube where she's being interviewed for the Donors Award she's just received for her research in ophthalmology. She's the first woman to have ever received the award, and because I am an indirect beneficiary of her professional discernment, I find myself scrutinizing her expression for the emotion she so normatively withheld in the exam room. She's holding a bouquet of flowers and looks self-assured, exuberant even. She's looking into the camera in a sustained way, her face more relaxed and gentle than it was when we met. I realize this is the closest I'll ever get to her on the screen, where she seems more person-like. Cancer, formed from the root car, meaning hard, true, but how to find in the word a way to articulate the fear, as if from an alien planet, as if a paranoiac's invention, something that vindicated delusion, made just to show us how afraid we could be. They say cancer cells remember things they shouldn't. Stem progenitor life taking form in a process that should stop. You want the cells to stay, not to wander, but something happens to them. Some kind of early programming awakes and the cells grow unregulated, spread through the body. From a mutation, a cascade. From the same root careen, to cause to keel over, to lurch from side to side or to expose the underside. The morning of the surgery, the doctors draw a small black X in marker over his left eye. The X marks his eye's ground zero, prefigures it as target. It's both aftermath and the site of future ruin. We're told that the surgeon will put him to sleep, then detach his eye from the 6 muscles that hold his eye in the socket. They'll suture a hard metal plate filled with radioactive seeds over the tumor on the back surface of his eyeball. Reattach the muscles, then wake him up. After surgery, patients are sent to one of the hospital's partner hotels, where they wait for the plaque to deliver enough radioactivity to kill the tumor. Will's Eye Hospital partners with the Hilton Garden Inn, which offers cancer patients a discounted nightly rate. I'd walked by this hotel many times, but had never been inside. On Google, I see that people specifically note the hotel's location is ideal for touring the city. Out of the 1,687 reviews posted on Google, most all praise the location, while only one mentions cancer. The review mentioning cancer is written by Paris Smith TV, a mother whose 2-year-old son is being treated for retinoblastoma at Hillside. Her son would have undergone the same radiotherapy procedure that G does for his tumor. Paris Smith TV writes that she was overcharged for the 4 nights they need to stay for her son's procedure. When she talks to hotel staff, they tell her that because it's NFL draft week, the rooms are more expensive than is normally the case. She pays them what they ask, and based on the review she's left on Google, I assume she pays out of pocket. Waiting for the radioactivity of the plaque to do its work is a medically necessary part of the life-saving procedure that is plaque radiotherapy. But the hotel is not a hospital. It is a place for people who pass through town, such as those who come for the NFL draft, book their rooms. At the front desk of the hotel, there's a large carafe of water, at the bottom of which are sliced cucumbers. I sit near a small girl with several suitcases at her feet as I wait for G's parents to check him in. When we get our room key, we go up the elevator to the top floor of the building. Spare pieces of furniture populate the hotel room. 2 small twin beds and a small desk. The doctors had given him instruction not to leave the hotel suite for 7 days, except to have breakfast, which we do have every morning in the hotel's restaurant. Each morning, we see another old man with wispy white hair who, like G, has large bandages covering his eye. Seeing this man confirms the alienness of our predicament as interlopers in the polite pretenses of the hotel's dining atmosphere. He, radioactive, and I, another kind of parabion, countenancing the runny eggs and orange juice. I later look at the average cost per inpatient day in Pennsylvania and find that the average cost of per inpatient day in Pennsylvania for for-profit hospitals is $2,071. The Hilton Garden Inn, on the other hand, according to Google, it costs only $116 per night. Wilside Hospital is a half-mile southeast of the Hilton Garden Inn, and a doctor drives over in a van once a day to check on him. Sometimes they stay for 2 minutes, or if I can pin them down with a line of questioning, they stay for 10. Most of the time, G and I are at the hotel suite alone. He needs Ativans and Percocets at set intervals for pain and anxiety. The medications are staggered, so I write down times. I've given him a dosage in a small notepad next to his bed, so I don't forget when he's been given them and when he'll need them again. When I'm not giving him his medications or bringing him food or cleaning the room or talking to doctors, I'm at the small desk, reading everything I can about his cancer. Fear is a response to danger, which might occur suddenly and result in bodily harm if not avoided. It's supposed to be ephemeral, motivate us to seek safety. All the medical papers I read indicate abysmal survival rates for people with eye cancer. When danger comes in the form of a life-threatening condition from which the body cannot be separated or made safe, the only possible response is panic, chronic, disabling, an irrational fear triggered by irrational conditions. I start to hear a high-pitched noise in my head that won't go away. Doctors had cautioned us to avoid sleeping in the same bed due to the potential exposure to radioactivity by the plaque attached to Greg's eye. But I can't bring myself to reify the isolation of diagnosis, to submit to the new divisions and splits that treatment requires between my cancer-free body and his. We sleep squeezed against one another every night that week, in one of the room's 2 twin beds, being careful with our bodies so as not to jar or shake the plate in his eye. A month or so after he's diagnosed, I joined the OcuMail email listserv. He doesn't want to join the listservs or the Facebook support groups, or attend the cancer support groups at the hospital, or go to therapy, or take the dozens of different supplements I buy after his diagnosis. But we decide someone must know things, so we negotiate a fragile pact. I will try to find and house the knowledge we need to give him the best chance at survival, and then tell him only what he needs to know. This puts me in the strange position of being the collector of cancer knowledge with all of its terrifying portents of early death. also the appraiser of its use value. Over the course of 4 years, I received 779 emails through the listserv. Michael London W1 seems to be by far the most knowledgeable about the available research on treatment options. I come to see him as a hero of sorts. He openly shuns the respectability politics of some of the other patients. He's blunt about the fact that chemotherapies have shown no evidence of clinical benefit for metastatic ocular melanoma. For some people, it is better to know the truth and die of the truth, and for some, it is better to believe a lie and die of the truth. The truth about this cancer is terrifying, and I've come to know something, by proxy, of the relentless fear that accompanies this disease. I want to know enough to know when we're being lied to, know enough to know that there's more that can be done. I do this hoping that knowing has something to do with stopping the spread of cancer or ending the disease, but all of what I come to know impugns the usefulness of knowing more. At the same time, the people who have this illness or study this illness are the people whose words I can now most afford. The fact that such a community exists proves that medicine fails. It fails to inform and fails to cure. I come to know things through the listserv that I would never have known had I not joined, things that doctors don't have time to explain to us. People discuss which clinical trials they're participating in, what kind of results they are or aren't seeing. They share information about what trials are being held at which hospitals. They debate the best MRI and CT surveillance schedules based on the grade and genetic makeup of their tumors. They share news about their own metastatic tumors, how much the tumors have grown, how long they've been told they have to live. They debate the benefits of adjuvant therapies, immunotherapies, targeted therapies, and chemotherapies, given that there is no clinical evidence that indicates these therapies prolong life. To be a part of this listserv is to be privy to others' desperation and fear, while not always being in the company of the desperate or the fearful. To be connected in this way is to be saved and condemned by the circulation of knowledge and information. The same drug price hikes and inflation, the same lack of availability of clinical trials or drugs, the lack of cure. Though what I learn fills me with fear, I do this every day, because there is no one else who will do it for him. And because if he is going to die, I refuse to let him die of our faith in medicine, or hospitals, or doctors, or progress. Ocular melanoma is the most common ocular cancer. About 2,000 people each year are diagnosed. The ocular melanoma tumor is a tumor of the dark brown melanocytes that form a sheet, much like a photographer's backdrop behind the retina. Only 6 in a million people will have ocular melanoma in their lifetime. The odds of developing this cancer are purportedly less than the odds that one will be struck by lightning, and less than the likelihood that one will be killed by an asteroid. There is a rhetoric in these statistics. The smallness of the 6 against the largeness of the 1 admits this disease's uncommonness. It also communicates to those who don't have the disease their relative distance from it, the unlikelihood of contraction or subordination to its victims. To those who have been diagnosed, statistics like this one highlight the contradictions of diagnosis. That is the paradox of the rarity of disease with the fact of their own prognosis, producing a confused disequilibrium in which the people who have been caught can be called and call themselves unfortunate. Statistics specify marginality through comparison, helping us to hedge our lives against the quantitative net of misery's distribution, and to look either in identification or non-identification at the world's condemned. They normalize the catastrophic and numerical incidents, as if cancer had neither social origin nor involved systems of power. Some of the numbers I find on cancer demonstrate an impending increase in cancer rates, a wild shift. Currently, cancer is responsible for 1 in 8 deaths worldwide. The International Agency for Research on Cancer predicts that by 2030, around 26 million new cancer cases and 17 million cancer deaths will occur each year worldwide. The number of cancer cases are projected to more than double in the next 20 to 40 years, to surpass heart disease as the leading cause of death in the world. Ascribing origin to cancer is riddled with problems from a medical and legal perspective. It's clinically impossible to pinpoint the exact cause of an individual's cancer. As Shigenobu Nataki says, it is impossible to distinguish a radiation-induced cancer patient and non-radiation-induced cancer patient, even when using state-of-the-art techniques. Though it's impossible to pinpoint the exact pathogenesis of an individual's cancer, most people know that we're surrounded by countless carcinogens, that risk factors for cancer are atmospheric, ubiquitous. Although they say that survival outcomes for people diagnosed with melanoma have improved drastically over the last decade, the same cannot be said for ocular melanoma. Both the incidence rate and prognosis remain unaltered. There is far less money and resources devoted to studying ocular melanoma because there are less people affected by it than are affected by cutaneous melanoma. It's challenging to even find research specific to ocular melanoma because of the predominance of literature on cutaneous melanoma. Though the cancers both originate in the melanocytes, they are pathologically distinct diseases with distinct mutational profiles and cell signaling pathways. The treatments that seem to slow the onslaught of cancer death for those with cutaneous melanoma have proven clinically ineffective for ocular melanoma. There is no cure for most cancers, but this is doubly so for ocular melanoma, for which there are also no known therapies that prolong life. I read somewhere that when sunlight hits moon dust, the dust becomes electrically charged. The dust repels from the moon's surface, lifts off by electrostatic levitation. This creates an atmosphere of dust, a thin haze that may blur distant features or glow dimly after the sun has set. The smallest of particles can be repelled miles from the surface, moving in fountains as they charge and discharge. What I understand from this is that every particle of matter has a certain origin, no matter how far it travels from its source, and no matter the opacity or glow of the resulting haze. We begin to seek out trails where we can spend many hours walking. We like taking on the paths, the lines moving out from the parking lots into forest. One morning we go out, the lines of the city, and at a tree-lined street, and buried behind the sign is a trail that takes us down toward the river. We sit there momentarily before we head again in a tree line, making our way over dirt and slabs of schist. I see him stepping ahead of me, heel first, into the mountain. I scrutinize the mountainside the whole way up in the hopes of finding some ripe blueberries to share, but there are only a few and less as we near the top. That is, things become more architectural and pared down as we climb. There's just him, me, what's on our backs, and the reason we came all this way. We say we're at our best when we're walking. It's the stillness and not moving we fear, because we know what we can't see is on the move. There's haze where the sky touches horizon. It might be dust charged by the sun or pollution coming from farther south. The higher we climb, the better range we have, the farther we can see. But the world continues on after the curved line our lines draw at the horizon is something we can't confirm ourselves. A black cloud, limned with light, rises to meet us on the mountain. The earth's incline will roll anything not rooted to the earth into tree line, and then, more slowly, if given enough time, to ocean. Along the trail, we find purple flowers, sepals facing downward as if overcome. Brown dust and pine needles cover the ground. Disturbed by our passing, falling from trees, or being affected by some wind, the dust and pine needles sometimes seem to levitate around us. Thank you.